Julian felt his very essence being torn from the wreckage of his short, hard life. One minute, he was celebrating, the meager funds he'd scraped together over a year of mind-numbing factory work finally enough to get him back into high school. The next, the screech of tires and a universe of shattering glass. His soul hovered, a phantom of indignation, over the crumpled sedan that had ended it all. Before a curse could form on his spectral lips, a force, clinical and devoid of sympathy, pulled him into an abyss. It introduced itself as a system, something about transmigration and a 10th anniversary giveaway for the prematurely deceased. He was told he was being gifted the life of a wealthy heir, an offer he initially met with profound skepticism. But the alternative was oblivion, and a life of luxury, even a borrowed one, beat non-existence. He acquiesced, proclaiming his newfound love for cosmic temp work. He was still Julian, but this version was born with a silver spoon. At 17, this Julian was already a junior at the prestigious Northwood Preparatory Academy, while the old Julian had been assembling circuit boards. He ran a hand over the impossibly smooth, navy blue blazer of his new uniform. He opened a textbook on the desk, the pages crisp and untouched. He buried his face in it, inhaling the scent of fresh ink and paper, a fragrance of opportunity he'd long been denied. The aroma was intoxicating. Just as he began to decipher a complex calculus equation, a sharp, phantom rap on his head broke his concentration. The system alerted him to the protagonist's arrival. Julian looked up, flustered, as the classroom door swung open. A tall young man with a quiet, severe intensity walked in. A torrential downpour raged outside, a mid-autumn squall that had sent the temperature plummeting. Yet the newcomer wore only a threadbare short-sleeved button-down that had seen too many washes. His head was bowed, dark hair obscuring his features, but Julian could make out the sharp line of his jaw and lips that were pale from the cold. A from the system flashed through his consciousness, informing him that this was the man who would, in the original story, orchestrate the ruin of his family. A torrent of information flooded his mind. This world was a novel, and the boy, Caleb, was its hero. An orphan from a background of grinding poverty, burdened with a gravely ill younger sister, he was at Northwood on a full scholarship. To cover his sister's exorbitant medical bills, he worked nights at a downtown bar. The original Julian, a spoiled, cruel caricature, despised Caleb's proud defiance in the face of his destitution. He'd spread vicious rumors about Caleb selling his body at the bar, a prelude to a campaign of relentless physical and emotional torment. The plot, however, provided Caleb with a savior, the story's heroine, a girl from an even more powerful family. With her help, Caleb not only escaped Julian's clutches, but also discovered his true parentage after graduation, heirs to a vast fortune. The story concluded with the newly empowered Caleb systematically dismantling Julian's family empire and having Julian himself disposed of, a final, grim footnote. Julian glanced at Caleb's broad shoulders and the corded muscles visible on his forearms as he took a seat, then looked down at his own slender, pale wrists. He posed a silent, incredulous question to the system about how someone of his delicate build was supposed to physically torment a person built like a heavyweight boxer. The system responded with digital scorn, reminding him that money was the great equalizer and that he needed to get on with the scene. A chilling realization dawned on him. He pointed out that if he followed the script, he was still doomed to die in a few years. The system offered no reply. Instead, Julian felt his body move on its own, rising from his chair and striding toward Caleb, who had taken the classic protagonist's seat in the last row by the window. He slammed a hand against the wall behind Caleb's head, leaning in close. His voice, however, was deliberately loud, laced with a venom that wasn't his own. He asked the resident genius what he was doing selling himself at a bar after school. The ugly, predictable drama instantly captivated the classroom. As whispers erupted, Caleb finally looked up, his gaze a shard of ice. The sheer coldness of it sent a tremor through Julian's legs. Only the hand braced against the wall kept him from collapsing. Swallowing hard, he forced out the next line, his lips trembling. He suggested that since Caleb was already selling himself, he might as well sell to him. Caleb's jaw tightened, a muscle twitching near his temple. He asked, his voice low and dangerous, what Julian meant by that. The novel's final, brutal scene flashed in Julian's mind. Every additional taunt now would only make his future demise more gruesome. He had to change this. He couldn't be a passive victim. He started to pull his hand back, forcing a dry laugh, trying to explain that he was only kidding. Before he could finish, a searing pain erupted in his chest, as if from an internal lightning strike. His legs gave out completely, and he crumpled, landing directly in Caleb's lap. The pain radiated through his limbs, paralyzing him. He could only clench his teeth and demand to know what was happening, asking the system if this body came with a terminal illness. The system offered a sheepish digital chuckle, explaining that he had forgotten to mention the electric shock punishment for any deviation from the original script or dialogue. This was a death trap. A frigid voice from above cut through his internal agony. Caleb asked him how long he planned to sit there. Julian instinctively shifted, becoming acutely aware that while Caleb looked lean, his thighs were like solid steel beneath him. In his panic to avoid falling earlier, his left hand had tangled in the front of Caleb's shirt. As the numbness from the shock receded, another realization hit him. The firmness was not limited to Caleb's legs. But this was no time for such observations. Under Caleb's murderous stare, Julian shakily pulled a thick wad of cash from his blazer pocket, a prop he hadn't known was there. As the script dictated, he fanned the bills out. He trailed them from Caleb's neck up to his jaw, then, with a final, dramatic flourish, slapped him across the face with the money, leaving an angry red mark on his pale skin. He spat out the final, cruel line, offering $5,000 for one night and Caleb not to be ungrateful. A hush fell over the room. The wind howled through a crack in the window frame, making the classroom feel several degrees colder. Julian, even in his blazer, shivered. Caleb, in his thin shirt, remained unnervingly still. But the script was absolute. Tomorrow was the deadline for his sister's surgery payment, and even with his savings, he was exactly $5,000 short. He had no choice. After a long, tense silence, Caleb lifted his gaze. His eyes were glacial, his mouth twisted into a sardonic smirk. He agreed tonight would be fine. Hearing this, Julian scrambled to get off Caleb's lap, terrified that another second's delay would result in his immediate demise. But a hand, large and strong, clamped around his waist, holding him fast. Panic flared. His instincts screamed at him to stay still, but the invisible puppet master of the plot forced him to maintain his role. He shoved the wad of cash down the collar of Caleb's shirt, his voice a mocking purr. He asked if the price was too low. The hand on his waist tightened, squeezing the air from his lungs. Caleb's eyes were dark with a gathering storm. His voice was a raw rasp when he replied that it was more than enough, thanking Mr. Julian for his generosity. The spot where Caleb's fingers had dug into his side ached through the rest of the school day. During physics, the teacher demonstrated principles of motion, but Julian's desire for knowledge had been extinguished. He lay with his head on his desk, convinced he'd rather just die now and get it over with. The system, manifesting in his mind's eye with a tiny digital sweatband, tried to cheer him on, spouting platitudes about a bright future. Julian risked a glance back at Caleb, who was taking notes with a blank expression, his knuckles white around his pen. He looked like he was moments away from snapping it in two. The pain in Julian's side intensified. When the final bell rang, the rain was coming down in sheets, blurring the world outside into a gray watercolor. Most students decided to wait out the storm, but Julian, on autopilot, walked to Caleb's desk and tapped it, telling him to follow. A sleek black car, driven by his family's chauffeur, was already waiting at the entrance to the building. Julian slid into the dry, plush interior, then looked out at Caleb standing in the downpour, a sneer fixed on his face. He gave him 15 minutes to get to his apartment, or the deal was off. As the car pulled away, Caleb's figure was swallowed by the rain. The drive to his penthouse was less than 5 minutes. For Caleb, on foot, it would be 20, an impossible journey in this weather. Slumped in the luxurious leather seat, Julian gently knocked his head against the seat in front of him, whispering apologies to a man who couldn't hear them. It wasn't his fault. It was the author's. He hadn't been home 10 minutes when the housekeeper showed Caleb in. He was soaked through, water dripping from his clothes onto the polished hardwood floors, his chest heaving slightly from having run the entire way. Julian, adhering to his prescribed character, yelled at him for getting the room wet, acting as if he had no part in Caleb's miserable state. Caleb kept his head down, the shadow from his wet hair making his expression unreadable and menacing. Remembering the original Julian's fate, a shiver of fear went through him. He grabbed a thick bath towel from a nearby linen closet and tossed it at Caleb, telling him to go take a shower, that he stank. The towel, large enough to envelop Julian, looked small in Caleb's grasp as he bunched it in one hand. He muttered a quiet okay and disappeared into the bathroom. The system was ecstatic, bouncing around in his mind, marveling at his sudden bravery and eagerly anticipating the salacious events to come. Julian scoffed internally. He had reviewed the source material. The novel was strictly young adult and faded to black on anything remotely explicit. The system insisted, however, that the text clearly stated he tormented Caleb all night. It then threatened him with another jolt of pain if he didn't comply. Julian ignored it, pulling his homework from his backpack and slamming it onto his desk. Caleb was quick in the shower. By the time Julian had sorted through his assignments, he was already out. His own clothes were a lost cause, so he wore a set of Julian's old ones. The shirt was too tight across his shoulders, forcing him to leave the top 2 buttons undone and roll the sleeves to his elbows. The sweatpants, which were always too long on Julian, fit him perfectly. Julian felt a petty pang of envy. Of course, the protagonist would have a better physique than the cannon fodder villain. He gestured to the chair next to him, telling him to sit. Caleb obeyed, perching stiffly on the edge of the seat. His hands clenched into fists in his lap. His voice, softened by a slight nasal congestion from the rain, had lost some of its hard edge, but the revulsion in it was still palpable. He asked what Julian wanted. Julian simply nodded towards a steaming mug on the desk, telling him to drink it. Caleb's face darkened further, and he accused Julian of going too far. It was just hot tea with honey and lemon to ward off a chill. Did Caleb's mind, like the system's, immediately jump to something sordid? Maintaining his imperious facade, Julian repeated the ultimatum. Drink it or forget the money. Caleb stared at him, then snatched the mug and drained it in one go, likely not even tasting it. He wiped his mouth with the back of his wrist and asked him to get on with it, mentioning he had to be at the hospital by midnight. Julian pointed to the calculus worksheet on his desk. He stated that he didn't know how to do it and that Caleb was going to teach him. A crack finally appeared in Caleb's icy composure. He was here to be a tutor? Julian rolled his eyes, the spoiled brat persona now second nature. He snapped that he wanted to learn so his parents would be happy, then demanded Caleb hurry up, as there was a lot of homework. If he didn't finish, he wouldn't get his 5,000. Threatened with money once again, Caleb visibly relaxed. The tension seemed to drain from his shoulders. That relief was short-lived, however, as the atmosphere in the room grew tense again, this time due to Julian's staggering rate of incorrect answers. Caleb finally asked, his voice strained, if Julian had ever paid attention in class. Of course not, Julian thought. He'd spent the last year in a factory. Staring at the paper, marked with a dismal 42%, he silently defended himself. He'd been an undocumented minor, working illegal hours, from 8 in the morning until 10 at night. By the time he got back to the cramped dorm, he was too exhausted to do anything but sleep, his hands often too swollen to hold a pen. He wouldn't have scored this poorly if he'd actually had a chance to learn the material. Sensing his sudden dejection, Caleb seemed to realize he'd been too harsh. He sighed, took the worksheet, and pulled a pristine freshman-year textbook from Julian's shelf. He suggested they build a solid foundation first, explaining that doing endless problem sets was useless otherwise. The system was displeased with this loophole, but there was nothing it could do. It was after 11 when they finally finished the worksheet. Julian could change into his silk pajamas and sleep in his own bed. Caleb had to put his still damp clothes back on, visit his sister at the hospital, and then work a 3-hour shift at a convenience store. Seeing the exhaustion in Caleb's eyes, Julian almost told him to just stay and rest. But the system intervened, reminding him that the convenience store was where Caleb and the heroine were fated to meet for the first time. The most Julian could do was thrust an umbrella into Caleb's hands and gruffly tell him to get out. For the next 2 months, this became their routine. Julian continued to pay Caleb $5,000 a day to come to his apartment, a transaction that, on the surface, fulfilled the novel's vague description of torment. In reality, Caleb tutored him every evening. Seeing that Julian's academic struggles were genuine, Caleb's attitude softened considerably. He began preparing specific lessons tailored to Julian's pace and even created a set of customized notes. When Julian made a mistake, Caleb no longer got frustrated, but would patiently explain the concept again from the beginning. On days when Julian's score on a practice test met his expectations, Caleb, who was so reserved in front of everyone else, would offer a faint, rare smile and sincerely praise his progress. Because the torment phase of the novel was glossed over in a single sentence, Julian had some breathing room. He didn't have to play the villain constantly. At school, however, he maintained the persona, treating Caleb like he was invisible. Other students speculated that Julian had slept with Caleb and then callously discarded him. Caleb, seemingly chalking it up to Julian's princely whims, never questioned the dual behavior, which was a relief. Lately, however, Caleb had been looking at his phone more frequently, a soft, happy smile sometimes gracing his lips, a smile warmer than the ones he gave Julian for his academic achievements. It was infuriating, just because he'd met some beautiful girl, just because she'd helped him find an easier job and get his sister moved to a private room at the hospital. Julian fumed silently. Caleb was so easily swayed. Pressing down too hard, the tip of his pen tore through the paper. Caleb put down his phone and leaned closer, his voice soft. He told Julian not to get anxious if he was stuck on a problem. His lips were so close to Julian's ear that his warm breath sent a shiver down his spine, making him flinch. Seeing Caleb looking so much healthier and happier than when they first met, clearly flourishing under the glow of new love, Julian's mood soured further. He muttered under his breath that there wouldn't be a later, because in a few days, Caleb wouldn't want to be his tutor anymore. Caleb mistook it for another tantrum and ruffled his hair gently. He asked what nonsense he was talking about, reminding him of his goal to get into a top-tier university to make his parents proud, encouraging him to try a little harder. Julian turned his head, avoiding his touch. Felt patronizing, like he was placating a child. Gossip buzzed through the halls the next day. A stunningly beautiful girl had transferred into the class next door. Students gathered in hushed, excited groups to discuss Isabel, the book's heroine. Her parents' work had brought her family from New York City. The plot was unfolding precisely. Isabel would soon notice Julian bullying Caleb and use her family's considerable influence to force Julian to leave him alone. Since the original Julian had grown bored of his plaything anyway, he would readily agree. The thought of losing his top-tier tutor filled Julian with a strange sense of loss. He stared at the physics test on his desk, but couldn't summon the energy to correct his mistakes. A gasp from a nearby student cut through his reverie. Isabel was in their classroom talking to Caleb. The peanut gallery immediately declared them a perfect match, a celestial pairing. One enterprising student even offered to come up with a ship name for them. Julian's hand, holding a box cutter to trim his paper, slipped. A long, thin red line appeared on the back of his left hand. He ignored the sting, his gaze drawn irresistibly toward the hallway. Isabel and Caleb were leaning against the railing, deep in conversation. As a new transfer, she wasn't in uniform yet. She wore a deep red velvet dress, her dark, curly hair cascading over her shoulders. She radiated a dazzling main character aura. Caleb, even in his simple school uniform, held his own beside her, the two of them looking just as the other students had described. A perfect couple. As they talked, they both glanced into the classroom. Julian quickly hid his face behind his test paper, peeking through a small tear. Isabel smiled, a charming dimple appearing in her cheek. Julian bit his lip, watching Caleb return her smile with a faint one of his own. His heart ached with a bitter, acidic feeling. Lucky bastard. In a few days, without him in the way, Caleb would be free to live happily ever after with her. That evening, when Caleb asked to see his latest test scores, Julian listlessly pulled the papers from his bag. Caleb's voice was bright with pleasure as he read the results, noting the significant improvement. He seemed more excited than Julian was. Julian just stared at his desk, the image of Caleb and Isabel on the balcony replaying in his mind. Caleb noticed his distraction. He put down the papers and swiveled Julian's chair to face him. Julian mumbled that he didn't feel like studying and told Caleb he should go to the hospital early. He tried to get up, but Caleb grabbed his left wrist. His brow furrowed. He asked what happened to his hand. Before Julian could react, Caleb had pushed up his sleeve, revealing the dark, angry-looking cut. Since he hadn't bandaged it, the edges of the skin had curled back, a grim slash against his pale arm. Julian shrugged, saying it was just an accident and tried to pull away. Compared to the injuries he'd sustained working in the factory, this was nothing. He'd almost forgotten it was there. But Caleb's face was grim, his voice sharp with a severity Julian had never heard directed at him before. He lectured him about the risk of infection, about how an untreated wound could lead to tissue necrosis. His grip was immense, his fingers digging painfully into Julian's wrist. Looking at Caleb's unsmiling face, Julian felt an overwhelming wave of self-pity. He hadn't cried when he was mocked for being an orphan, when his wages were stolen, or even when he was hit by that car. But now, the unshed tears from that day finally broke free. They fell in thick, silent drops onto the back of Caleb's hand. Humiliated, but unable to escape Caleb's grip, Julian turned his head away. Suddenly, his world went dark and warm. Caleb had pulled him into an embrace. His shoulders were broad, and his arms wrapped around Julian completely, creating a small, safe harbor where he could finally let go. Julian stayed there for a long time, until the fabric of Caleb's shirt was soaked through with his tears, and until he was forced to admit the truth to himself. All of this turmoil, this inexplicable sadness, was because he was in love with him. But Caleb was the hero of this story, and he was just an imposter, a disposable villain constrained by the plot. Caleb was like him, poor, orphaned, but so much stronger. He had earned his place at this school, cared for his sister, and never lost his pride, even when facing the original Julian's cruelty. He deserved someone as wonderful as Isabel. He deserved a happy ending. This was their first embrace, and it would have to be their last. He gently pushed Caleb away, forcing a smile and assuring him he was fine. But Caleb wouldn't let it go, his hands firm on Julian's waist, demanding an explanation. Julian lied, claiming he was upset because his busy parents didn't care about his improved grades. Caleb's expression softened from stern to amused. He called him a little prince, then gently pinched his nose. He offered a deal. If Julian scored above 520 on the next monthly exam, he would have a surprise for him. Julian agreed non-committally, his mind still on Caleb and Isabel. To quiet his own anxieties, he hesitantly asked if the girl who had approached him that day had been confessing her feelings. Caleb laughed, explaining that Isabel had just been talking to him about co-hosting the Winter Gala. Julian felt a wave of relief, which was immediately crushed by the memory that, in the novel, the original Julian dumped Caleb right after that very same gala. Caleb then added that they wanted him to perform a piano solo at the event, asking if His Highness would be willing to grace them with his presence. He tilted Julian's chin up with his forefinger, his gaze gentle. A lump formed in Julian's throat. He managed to croak out an agreement. His voice was raw from crying, but Caleb didn't seem to notice. He just pushed him gently back into his chair and said he would go get the first aid kit. The night of the gala was also the night after their last monthly exam. The scheduling was brutal. Julian finished his test and rushed backstage. The senior girl in charge of makeup immediately pulled him into a chair, complaining that his skin was too perfect to showcase her skills as she dabbed foundation on his face. Julian's attention, however, drifted to Isabel, who was nearby reviewing her cue cards. She wore a champagne-colored evening gown with a flowing train, her hair styled in an elegant updo. She looked like a fairy tale princess. She caught him staring. With a rustle of silk, she was beside him, borrowing a lipstick from the makeup artist and announcing she would do his lips. She cupped his chin with one hand, the lipstick gliding smoothly across his lips with the other. A rich rose scent filled the air, and his heart hammered against his ribs. He didn't dare move. Isabel chuckled. She'd heard Julian was quite the Casanova, but he seemed awfully innocent up close. A bell went off in Julian's mind. Was she flirting with him? No, that was impossible. She was just teasing him. The heroine was supposed to be rational and poised, interested only in Caleb. Why would she flirt with the man who was bullying her love interest? Before he could process the thought, she finished and stepped back, appraising her work with a satisfied nod. She murmured that someone had been right, he was very cute. The backstage clamor was too loud, and Julian asked what she'd said. She just smiled. Then her expression shifted. She said, with a hint of regret, that someone was coming. The scent of roses faded, replaced by the clean, cool scent of soap that was uniquely Caleb's. He was standing beside him. He took Julian's jaw in one hand and, with the thumb of the other, roughly wiped away the lipstick Isabel had just applied. Of course, the hero was jealous. But why was he jealous over this? Julian was a rival, a non-entity in the grand scheme of his and Isabel's love story. Caleb's grip was so tight it made Julian wince, but he didn't seem to notice. He spoke to Isabel, his tone formal, reminding her it was almost time to go on stage. Isabel made a small sound of annoyance and walked away. Caleb, however, remained. Witnessing this little drama, Julian felt a surge of irritation. He slapped Caleb's hand away, slipping back into his role as the petulant prince and glaring at him. He demanded to know why he was still there. Caleb leaned against the chair and produced a slim tube of lip gloss from his pocket. He explained that the last color was too dark and that he'd found one that would suit him better. Trapped, Julian could only hold still as Caleb carefully applied the gloss. He murmured that he was being good, his mood seeming to lift. Before leaving, he gave the back of Julian's neck a gentle squeeze and told him to meet him on the roof after the gala for his surprise. Julian's piano solo was the final performance of the night. From the stage, he could see Caleb in the wings, giving him a silent thumbs up. He pressed the first key. He was supposed to play something upbeat, but he had unilaterally changed the program to a melancholy piece titled Track in Time. It felt like a fitting eulogy for his short-lived, impossible crush. After the performance, he ignored everyone and went straight to the roof. A few minutes later, a gentle tap on the back of his head made him turn. It was Caleb holding a small slip of paper. He said he'd had the teachers grade Julian's exam early and asked him to guess his score. The paper showed a total of 525. An excellent score. Caleb put a hand on his shoulder and guided him toward the other side of the rooftop. He reminded him of his promise of a surprise. Behind a large ventilation unit sat a huge, gift-wrapped box. But Julian couldn't feel any curiosity, only a cold dread. This was it. This was where it had to end. He told himself that Caleb and Isabel were meant to be. He couldn't let his selfish feelings stand in the way of the story's happy ending. And he couldn't bear the thought of that agonizing electric pain again. He shrugged off Caleb's hand and turned to face him. He asked what was inside the box and why it should matter to him. He told Caleb he was annoying, that he should get lost and never come back to his apartment. Caleb was clearly taken aback by the sudden shift. He tried to reason with him, his voice soft, asking if he was just tired and suggesting they take a break from tutoring for a few days. Julian squeezed his eyes shut, forcing down the lump in his throat. He told Caleb he could hire any tutor he wanted, that he'd only bothered with him for sport, to see if he could break his arrogant pride. He said he was no different from anyone else who'd grovel for money. Now that he was bored, he was telling him to get lost. A humorless laugh escaped Caleb's lips. He asked if Julian really believed he was only helping him for the money. Julian forced a derisive laugh of his own, doubling over as if in mirth. Did Caleb actually think they could be friends? He told him to look in a mirror and see how unworthy he was. Caleb's hand shot out, gripping his shoulder with bruising force. His eyes burned with a mixture of anger and hurt as he demanded to know if Julian meant any of what he was saying. The pain in his shoulder was immense, but Julian forced a flippant smile. He asked why Caleb was getting so emotional, sarcastically wondering if he'd fallen in love with him and was planning to stalk him. He reminded him of the tens of thousands of dollars he'd already paid him, then took out his phone and made a show of transferring another $50,000, calling it a severance payment. Caleb's face went pale. The last words he ever said to him were that Julian was truly heartless. After that night, Caleb never came to his apartment again. At school, he actively avoided Julian, which made things easier. But there was no escaping the gossip. Everyone was saying that Caleb and Isabel had gotten together after the gala. The romance of the two most popular students was just casual lunchtime chatter for everyone else. But for Julian, each mention was like a knife twisting in the half-healed wound on his hand. Caleb had looked so devastated that night, but he'd moved on so quickly. Someone posted a picture of Caleb and Isabel in the school's memorial garden on the student forum. Julian's deskmate passed his phone around, and the consensus was that they made a handsome couple. Unable to listen anymore, Julian grabbed a book and fled the classroom, searching for a quiet place. A place where their love story wasn't the main topic of conversation. He ended up, unconsciously, in the very garden from the photo. He was about to turn and leave when he ran right into them. They weren't holding hands, but they stood close, an easy intimacy between them. Isabel's bright, happy gaze seemed to expose all of Julian's own dark, pathetic secrets. He looked away, his eyes meeting Caleb's. He wanted to run, but Caleb's expression was a blank mask, devoid of any emotion. Isabel, however, greeted him cheerfully. She waved and started to say something, but Caleb cut her off, his voice as cold as a winter lake. He told her not to bother with him. Julian's face went white. He managed a weak smile in Isabel's direction and fled. He walked faster and faster, not stopping until he was off school grounds, lost in a maze of unfamiliar back alleys in a rundown part of the city. He'd lived such a sheltered life here, going only from home to school and back, that he had no idea where he was. Giving up, he slumped down in a corner, pulling out his phone to call his driver. Just then, a group of rough-looking men ducked into the alley. One, who seemed to be the leader, explained that a rich client had paid them to take care of that kid, a boy named Caleb. The men disappeared into a dilapidated apartment building nearby. An uneasy feeling settled over Julian. He huddled deeper behind a stack of cardboard boxes and questioned the system. The system casually explained that Caleb's cousin, Trent, was afraid Caleb would usurp his position as the family heir and had arranged to have him killed. When Julian expressed his alarm, the system was dismissive, assuring him that Caleb was the protagonist and wouldn't actually die, just suffer a severe injury and fall into a coma for a few months. It was a classic plot device, the system explained, to allow the heroine to nurse him back to health and solidify their relationship. It warned Julian sternly not to interfere, reminding him that the punishment for altering a key plot point would be far worse than before. He waited, but instead of his driver, Caleb appeared. He had shed his school blazer and was wearing only a gray hoodie as he walked into the doomed building. A few moments later, the sounds of a violent struggle echoed from inside. Julian was frantic, but every time he tried to move, a jolt of pain from the system paralyzed him. Then came a sickening crash. He couldn't take it anymore. He burst into the building. The scene was not what he expected. Caleb stood alone amidst the wreckage, the thugs all unconscious on the floor around him. He turned as Julian entered. Terrified, Julian tried to bolt, but Caleb crossed the distance in 2 long strides, grabbing his wrist and slamming him against the wall. Julian stammered, asking if he was all right, confused by the deviation from the script. Caleb's breathing was ragged, his eyes glowing with a feral light. He asked if Julian had wanted him to be hurt. When Julian didn't answer, he demanded to know what he was doing in such a dangerous place. A strong smell of blood clung to him, overpowering his usual clean scent. Julian tried to turn away from his intense gaze, and in his peripheral vision, he saw the leader of the thugs staggering to his feet, a baseball bat in his hand. He swung it with all his might at Caleb's back. A surge of adrenaline gave Julian the strength to break free. He yelled "A" and threw himself into Caleb, spinning them both around. He took the full force of the blow across his own back. Before he could even register that pain, an even more excruciating agony exploded in his chest. The system's voice shrieked with static, "Warning. Major plot deviation detected." Then his world went black. When he awoke, he was in his own bed. The system informed him that while he had prevented Caleb's coma, Caleb's family had now been alerted to his existence. He and Isabel had already left for New York. In a strange way, he had inadvertently pushed the plot forward. As long as he stayed away from Caleb from now on, the story would correct itself. The system sounded pleased. This was the best outcome for everyone. Caleb would no longer seek revenge, and Julian could live out his life in comfort. In the final semester of his senior year, with the school's two most prominent figures gone, the gossip died down. Julian welcomed the peace, immersing himself in his studies, trying to erase Caleb from his memory. The seasons changed, and finally graduation arrived. He did well on his final exams, and for the first time in a long time, he felt a genuine flicker of happiness. The system had forbidden him from applying to schools in New York, but his scores were good enough for the best university in his own city. He pulled out his phone to share the good news with his parents, but his screen was flooded with breaking news alerts. The heir to the Chun Corporation, Caleb Chun, was presumed dead after a tragic cliffside accident, his body lost. He screamed at the system, demanding to know how the protagonist could be dead. The system was just as panicked, stammering that it was impossible before abruptly leaving to investigate. 3 days later, it returned. It confirmed that the cable car Caleb was riding had plunged into a turbulent river below. No body was found, but a scan revealed no trace of his brainwave activity. With no protagonist, the story could not continue. The system had to leave. Before it vanished for good, it told Julian he was lucky. Now, with the hero dead, the threat to his life was gone. Lucky? If he had known this world would introduce him to someone he couldn't have and then force him to witness that person's death. He would have preferred to stay dead after the car crash. Without the system's restrictions, he changed his university choice to one in New York. In September, he wandered through the bustling campus, a ghost among the living. Then he saw a familiar figure ahead, Isabel. She was radiant, chatting happily with other students. There was no trace of grief on her face. A tiny, impossible spark of hope ignited in his chest. He stumbled towards her, managing to ask about Caleb. Isabel just placed a finger on his lips, a mysterious smile playing on hers. She told him to be quiet and to come with her. She drove him out of the city, north towards the mountains. Noticing his questioning gaze, she began to explain. She'd always felt like a passenger in her own body, her actions not always her own. Then she'd had a dream that she was a character in a book. She didn't believe it until she met Caleb, exactly as described in the novel. She was tired of being a tool for the male lead's story and proposed they work together to change their fates. Caleb, naturally cautious, had initially thought she was crazy. But Julian's own bizarre and contradictory behavior had planted a seed of doubt in his mind, and he eventually agreed to listen. After the gala, they had pretended to follow the script while secretly analyzing Julian's actions. After Julian had saved him from the coma, they had a private investigator run a discreet medical scan on him. They found traces of an unexplainable electrical shock, confirming their theory of an external force, a system or a rule, controlling him. The car stopped outside an unmarked facility, a private biotech lab owned by Caleb's family. Isabel explained that they had tried everything to break the script, but nothing worked. Then Caleb had proposed a radical idea. What if the protagonist died? If the story couldn't continue, Would the system release its hold on Julian? The Chun family's lab had been researching human cryopreservation. Caleb had volunteered to be the first human subject to have all brain activity completely halted. The time had now come to revive him. She handed Julian a key card. She apologized for the deception, explaining they couldn't risk the system discovering their plan. Julian opened the door to the lab. In the center of the room was a large, transparent cylindrical chamber. Inside, suspended in a clear liquid, was Caleb. He looked exactly as he had a year ago, pale but peaceful, his eyes closed. Julian remembered his last question to Isabel. Why would Caleb take such a risk when he could have had a happy life by following the script? Isabel had smiled. Just as she didn't find happiness in being a background character, Caleb didn't think a life without the person he truly loved was a happy one. Julian pressed a button on the control panel. The liquid in the chamber began to drain. A team of researchers entered and quietly began to set up a sterile environment. As the last of the fluid receded, Caleb's eyes opened. He looked straight at Julian through the glass, and a slow, gentle smile spread across his face, the same smile he'd given him from the wings of the stage. He mouthed two words, "Jules, you're here." Caleb had heard about the arrogant little prince of Northwood Prep before he'd even started classes. When they finally met, the rumors didn't do Julian justice. He was beautiful and precious, with a fragile porcelain quality. But there was a spoiled petulance to him that Caleb found distasteful. He told himself it didn't matter. They were from different worlds. But then the storm came, and the little prince, smelling faintly of something sweet like vanilla, invaded his personal space, spouting nonsense. He was so obviously scared, his bravado a thin veneer. He'd stumbled into Caleb's lap, soft and warm like a newborn kitten, all bluster and no claws. He'd slapped him with the money, a pathetic attempt at dominance that stirred a strange, dark possessiveness in Caleb. He wanted to break him, but Julian was unexpectedly kind. He'd forced him to run through the rain, then brusquely ordered him to shower, leaving him a warm towel and clean clothes that carried his sweet scent. It was disorienting. When Julian made him drink the tea, Caleb thought the pleasant dream was ending, that the torment was about to begin. But then Julian had just wanted help with his homework. He was a terrible student, and when Caleb's frustration got the better of him, Julian had looked so wounded that Caleb's anger evaporated. How could he be mad at a clueless kitten? The kitten, however, was a dedicated student. He studied hard, took copious notes, and cherished the study guides Caleb made for him. At home, Julian was sweet and unguarded, sometimes even unconsciously grabbing Caleb's wrist for attention when a problem was too hard. At school, he was a different person, avoiding him, ignoring him. Caleb just smiled to himself. Such a little prince. Thanks to Julian, his sister Clara's medical bills were paid. She was getting better, and she teased him about the constant smile on his face. Caleb told her he'd met someone important. But then Julian's mood soured. He seemed listless and sad. When Caleb found the cut on his hand, a fierce, protective anger surged through him. He knew what real hardship was. His own hands were a map of scars and calluses. Julian's small cut was nothing, yet it made his heart ache. This precious boy should be cherished, not hurt. He'd gotten angry, and his anger had made Julian cry. He'd held him, soothed him, and felt a profound sense of rightness. But then Julian had changed again on the rooftop after the gala. He'd been cruel, dismissive, and vicious. The words were a knife, gutting the beautiful illusion Caleb had built in his mind. He looked at the gift he'd made for him, a large, hand-sewn plush toy filled with calming herbs. because Julian always seemed to need something to hold on to when he slept, and felt a chilling clarity. The moment before his rational mind snapped, he saw the unshed tears in Julian's eyes, and he remembered Isabel's crazy theory. It all clicked into place. The fear mixed with pain on the first day, the fake torment that was really a plea for help, the heartbreaking cruelty that was a mask for a deeper sorrow. Julian was trapped, and Caleb would do anything to set him free. As he stepped into the cryo chamber, Isabel looked at him, her face grim. She told him he might die. Caleb smiled. He told her that if he did, she should never let Julian find out the truth. Let him live his life happy and free. Julian was curled up in Caleb's arms. He looked up and asked what had happened to the plush toy. Caleb tightened his embrace, kissing him softly. He told him it was in storage, but he wasn't going to give it to him. From now on, Caleb said he was all Julian needed to hold on to. A few days later, Julian went to thank Isabel properly. He found her in an upstairs sitting room with Clara, Caleb's sister. Clara's health had improved dramatically. She was lounging with a blanket over her legs, watching Isabel struggle to pack several overflowing suitcases. Julian helped her latch them shut and asked if she was going on a trip. Isabel explained that the cold weather wasn't good for Clara's recovery, so she was taking her south for the winter. Julian finally took a good look at the quiet girl in the corner. He'd known of her existence for over a year but had never seen her. She had the same sharp, intense features as Caleb. If Isabel was a vibrant red rose, Clara was a delicate, resilient winter plum blossom. Under her steady gaze, Julian felt flustered. He introduced himself as her brother's boyfriend. Clara's lips quirked. She said he was cute. Julian pouted. First Caleb, then Isabel, and now his younger sister? Isabel laughed, telling Clara to stop teasing him or Caleb would be up all night comforting him. Clara sipped her tea, a small smile on her face. She replied that her brother enjoyed it and should be thanking her. Julian hid his blushing face. He remembered the gift he brought and handed it to Isabel, thanking her for her help. She accepted it, saying she should be thanking him too. Without him, Caleb would never have believed her, and she would never have been able to control her own life. She leaned in close and whispered in his ear, adding that she also would never have found her true love. She pulled back, leaving Julian with a meaningful look. Stunned, Julian's eyes darted to Clara. The girl raised a single finger to her lips. Shoo.